of the Christ who died for me. How he left his home in glory for the cross of Calvary. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. I was lost, but Jesus found me, found the sheep that went astray. Threw his loving arms around me, drew me back into his way. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. On that last, he will keep me till the river rolls its waters at my feet. Then he'll bear me safely over where the loved ones I shall meet. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. 514, number 514. In my heart there rings a melody. I have a song that Jesus gave me. It was sent from heaven above. There never was a sweeter melody. 'Tis a melody of love. In my heart there rings a melody. There rings a melody with heaven's harmony. In my heart there rings a melody, there rings a melody of love. I love the Christ who died on Calvary, for he washed my sins away. He put within my heart a melody, and I know it's there to stay. In my heart there rings a melody, there rings a melody with heaven's harmony. In my heart there rings a melody, there rings a melody of love. 'Twill be my endless theme in glory. With the angels I will sing. 'Twill be a song with glorious harmony when the courts of heaven ring. In my heart there rings a melody, there rings a melody with heaven's harmony. In my heart there rings a melody, there rings a melody of love. All right, 552. On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wishful eye. I'm bound for the promised land, number 552. On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. I am bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I am bound for the promised land. All o'er those wide extended plains shines one eternal day. There God the Son forever reigns and scatters night away. I am bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I am bound for the promised land. No chilling winds nor poisonous breath can reach that healthful shore. Sickness and sorrow, pain and death are felt and feared no more. I am bound for the promised land. I'm bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I am bound for the promised land. When shall I reach that happy place and be forever blessed? When shall I see my Father's face and in his bosom rest? I am bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I am bound for the promised land. All right, thank you. You may be seated. Well, this time, Jesse's going to come preach for us. He was originally scheduled to preach the first of the month, and I don't know if he wasn't ready or just didn't want to, but he got sick that day, and so he wasn't even at church that first Sunday of the month. And so told him we went ahead and rescheduled it, as we'd like to give Jesse the opportunity to preach, as he is called to do just that. And he fills a lot of roles here at the church and does a lot, and I'm thankful for his ministry here at the church. But he is also a preacher, and so we want to give him that opportunity. So, Jesse, you come and preach for us tonight.
Suppose there was a group who set out for a fishing trip. The group was led by a guide who they trusted would lead them to fish. Plenty of fish here. He led them to water, but the group became full of excuses for why they couldn't fish. Some people came on the trip dressed the part and full of great fishing stories, but never seemed to do anything. Some claimed they did not have the heart for fishing.
I can't fish. Cooking a worm? It's just too cruel.
But you know it's a rubber worm, right? Some said the work should be left to those whom were more skilled in the art of fishing.
Carl, he's really good at casting. Shouldn't he be doing all the fishing?
No, you can do it. It's really simple. Look, some claim that fishing was not their gift.
Hey, fishing's really not my thing. In fact, it scored a 0 on my spiritual gifts test. So.
No, we could still really use you. Before the guide could finish, Carl interrupted him.
I think I got one.
Hey, great. You mind helping out with some of the others?
No, it's okay.
Carl was more impressed with catching fish on his own than he was in helping people out, like Greg here.
I got a small problem here. My line's a little tangled up.
Oh, my goodness. How in the world did that? Some of the people fishing said they just didn't have time to fish. Matt, where are you going?
Oh, yeah. I have an appointment thing that's going around. It's okay. I got a stick. It's doing great. It's great. Whoa. Oops.
And some people, well, they just have problems.
Hey, my hook's caught on something.
What's it caught on?
Has anybody ever been on a fishing trip? There's several people that enjoy fishing. Okay, if you do like fishing but have never been on a fishing trip, like with people like this? No? Okay, so we have a fisherman here with us today. Fisherman Blaze. Do you have another name? Or Fisherman Blaze, is that good? All right. No cool names for fishers? Okay, so Fisherman Blaze here, he likes to fish. I mean, as you can tell, he's ready, he's prepared. He has his pole, he has his tackle box or bag in this case, and he has his cool hat. So there's a lot of things that take place when you go fishing, right? There's a lot of preparation that takes place when you go fishing. And if you're not prepared, you may not get the results that you want. So when it comes to fishing, you have to have the correct pole. The correct pole in his case is this one because that's the only one we had. So he has the correct pole. He's going to get what he wants to get. He's ready to go. But if you don't know with your fish, there are variances in the poles by weight and length. So depending on what you're trying to catch, there's going to be different poles you have to get. Also, you have to have the correct bait. So he has a lot of bait in there. It's not empty. It's full of bait, all kinds of bait. And he's ready to go. So whatever kind of fish he wants to get, it is there. Blaze, do you know how many different types of fishing poles there are? A lot. There's a lot, right? Okay, what about bait? How many types of fishing bait is there? A lot. There's so many types of bait. Can anybody just name off some types of bait that you use when you go fishing? Some minnows, some worms, stink bait, gross. That's why you take Eli with you? Smart. I get it. So there's spinner baits, there's crankbait, there's all kind of bait, right, that you can use when you go fishing. And it all depends on what kind of fish that you're going for is going to determine what kind of bait that you take. So you have to really be prepared in order to go fishing and to actually be successful at it. And you cannot do that without a bucket hat, especially if you don't have any hair. But thankfully for Blaze, he has hair. So Fisherman Blaze did borrow this hat from Pastor. Just going to throw it out there. So with all of this equipment, all of this preparation, now he's prepared. Now he's ready to go and fish, right? He knows what he wants to fish. He's done the research on what kind of bait he needs to catch whatever fish he's trying to catch. In this case, he's going to be catching catfish, okay? So he knows exactly what kind of pole he needs. He knows exactly what kind of bait he needs, and he knows where to do that and what pond, what lake, wherever he's trying to fish it at. He's done all this research, and now he's ready to go. He has everything he needs in order to catch this fish. So when you are in the preparation stage of trying to go fishing, you can't just pick any kind of pole, and you can't just pick any kind of bait. There's a very specific type of bait per type of fish that you want to try to catch. Blaze, thank you. You can go down. I mean, you can stand up here if you want. I don't really care, but you can go down. So when fishing, today what I want to do is liken fishing unto how Satan works. I think most of us already know a lot of the differences or a lot of the similarities with that, but Satan is our number one enemy. He's not just our number one enemy. He's the number one enemy of our families too, right? So Satan is experienced. Unlike the fisherman that we've seen in the video, he's prepared and he knows what he's doing when he's trying to catch certain people, right? Which in our case is that he's trying to catch Christians. But in each situation, it's a little bit different of what's going to hook you and what's going to lure you in. But Satan has done the preparation work. He knows what that's going to take, and he knows what he has to do. Because his main goal is to reel in lost souls and believers with deceptive and deceitful baits. So he's experienced, he's skilled, and he's prepared. He's ready to go, and he's ready to fight this fight. So today I want to look at another world. Ephesians is where we're going to look at. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. When you are on a fishing trip, there can be a lot of times of just waiting, right, when you're fishing. Like that guy that had an appointment in our video. He just set his pole down because he knew he had to wait anyways, right? So the expectation is you're going to be waiting, especially if you're trying to track a certain type of fish and follow wherever they're going throughout the lake, right? So there's going to be a lot of time, and what that's going to do is require patience. How many of you struggle with patience? I think a lot of us do. I know I do for sure, but I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with. But today I want to look at the enemy of our families. The fisherman is Satan, and the bait is the variety of deceptive tactics that he uses in the worldly philosophies. And the fish are young lives and families. And in our case, if I say young lives and teens a lot, this is what we're going through with the teens. So it is geared towards them. And so if I say teens, it's just because that's what it is. But this is obviously can be applied to anybody, no matter the age, whether your kids are at home, whether you're away in college, whatever the case, this can be applied to anybody and everybody. So the fish are young lives and families, or lives and families. The bait will differ from family to family, like I've already mentioned. The bait is going to be just depending on what lures you in. What is it that you fall on or you trip on when Satan brings it your way? when most of us have one certain thing that we just keep going and tripping and tripping and tripping, right? It's not usually like 20 different things that trip us up. It's usually a couple of things that trip us up, right? So Satan knows what those couple things are, and he's going to use those and maybe twist them slightly just to kind of get in there. But either way, he's going to use them to lure us in so that he can trap us. So the bait differs from family to family, but the hooks are always going to be the same. Shortly after the bite comes the pain, the wound, and the devastation, followed by the fight, the spiritual wrestling, the reeling in, and the ruination of another life or family. So when Satan does trip us up with a lure, that doesn't mean that after we've taken that, we've hooked on, that doesn't mean that now our lives are going to be awesome, right? There's always devastation that follows. Whether it be hurt for you or hurt for family, there's always some kind of devastation that's going to follow. There's going to be some bitterness, there's going to be pain, there's going to be all kinds of feelings that we have because we've been tripped up once again. So shortly after the bite comes the pain, wound, and devastation. The devil's fishing trips always look the same, but the face is going to change. And by saying that it's always going to be the same, he's always going to be prepared. He's always going to have the right lure and the right bait to lure us in. He's always going to have the right everything that he needs because he's been watching, he's been waiting, because he's ready to do something to pull us in, right? So no matter the fishing trip he's on, whether it's for me, whether it's for Melissa, whether it's for Lou, doesn't matter who it's for, they're all the same fishing trip. But the face of that trip is going to be different based on each individual, right? So he's always prepared. He's always out to destroy us, you, your family, and then young and old lives alike. He is crafty and he's skilled in deception. He is somebody that you can definitely rely on to deceive you in the things that he does. He's one that will take your imagination, which we'll talk about here in a minute, and make you think different things than what's actually happening, right? Because as we'll see here in a bit too, our imagination is the battleground that we're fighting with or against. So when we let Satan into our imaginations, that's when he starts to win. That's when our imaginations go wild, and that's when he starts to come in, and he can lure us and hook us and ultimately destroy us. So he's always prepared, and he's always crafty and skillful in deception. He understands the fish, and he knows just how to bait a hook. He knows exactly what to do to make you trip up every single time. Now, is there a way that we as Christians can prepare against the lures and the baits of Satan? For sure, there is, right? So it's not all gloom, because we know there is stuff that we can do in order to push that aside and push that away and not always get tripped up on the things that he brings our way. So a slaughter from another world, the slaughter is Ephesians 6:12. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So it's not a fight that's physical, it's a fight that's spiritual, that we're battling every single day. Seeing the other world. When it comes to fishing, there's two worlds. There's the world of the fish, which is us in this illustration, but the slight difference is the fish, what do they do all day? They swim. They kind of have a lifeless life, right? They just it's a mundane life. They swim around. They're not really that intelligent because they get hooked on everything. They don't really have a purpose, right? They're just there in the water. Obviously, we as Christians have purpose, but the fish, in the world of the fish, they just swim around all day with no real big purpose other than to not get eaten if you're a small fish, right? So the other part, or the other world, is the world of the fishermen. Just beyond the surface, just out of reach of the fish, where they can see, is a completely different world, and that's the world of the predator. That's the world of the person that is trying to hook them and destroy them because ultimately they want to eat them, right? If you go to and fish and throw them back, I mean, kudos to you. I'm not going to go fish and throw a fish back. I'm going to take them home so we can eat them. I don't fish that often. I don't think I've been fishing since we've been married. That tells you how much I go fishing. I don't go fishing, but I don't want to go fish and just throw it back. I want the purpose behind it. So there's the world of the fish, and then there's the world of the fishermen. But here's a pretty crazy thought. Remember, fisherman Blaze was up here a second ago. What if Blaze and Caden's not here, but he's his brother, and they go fishing together. So what if they went fishing one day, and Blaze loves fishing, right? He's all about fishing. And because he's all about fishing, he said, hey, let's go for a fishing trip. I think this will be fun. We can go catch fish and throw them back because that's how awesome it is, right? Blaze also likes fish. He likes to fish, like go fishing, but he likes the fish, like he loves the fish. He has a big heart for the fish, okay? This is Blaze. He just has a big heart for fish. If you didn't know that about Blaze, now you do. He loves fish. He doesn't want to see him die, okay? That's Blaze. So can you imagine this, though? They're on this fishing trip. Caden's fixing to throw out his stuff. Blaze jumps in that water and says, hey, fish, wait. Don't get that hook. Don't get it. Wouldn't that be kind of insane? That'd be crazy. I mean, I would laugh. I would video it. I would have a good time with it. But we know that would be insane. That would be unrealistic because Blaze isn't going to do that. No human being is going to do that, right? But here's the crazy thing. That's exactly what Jesus did for us, right? Jesus saw the world that we were living in. Jesus saw the things that we did. Jesus saw how dumb we are, right? How much we go for these baits, how much we get lured in. He saw all of this, and then he displayed that unimaginable love. He jumped into our world. He took on the form of a man so that we can have a chance to one, obviously repent of what we do, but also have that chance to get into heaven. So when we were being tracked by an unseen enemy, just beyond the surface, he jumped into our world, put on a body, and became a man so that we could see and understand the world beyond our physical eyesight, the real eternal world. Jesus paid an amazing price to give us intelligence into eternity. He laid down his life. He shed his blood to expose our enemy, give us salvation, and make us new creatures. Now we no longer have to swim through life ignorantly, biting on all of the things that come our way, and falling prey to an enemy that we cannot comprehend. Is there a lot to understand about Satan? For sure, there is, right? About the spiritual world in general, there's a lot to understand. It's something that without Christ, without him coming down, is something that we probably never would have understood, right? Unless obviously God had a different plan. But now that Christ did come in, now we have that opportunity to understand it, to see it, and that way we don't have to keep getting hooked in. So being a successful fisherman depends as much on the ignorance of the fish as it does the skill of the fisherman. We know that fish are kind of dumb. We know that we're kind of dumb, right? The fisherman is smart, Satan. He's prepared. He studies everybody. He knows, he does all the research. He knows what hooks you. He knows what bait to use. He knows what to do to lure you in. Same with the fisherman. Fisherman Blaze isn't going to go just to some random pond and throw in whatever he has in his bag. He's going to research what kind of fish are there. He's going to find out what bait he needs in order to catch that type of fish, right? He's going to be prepared. So a successful fisherman successful fisherman depends on as much the ignorance of the fish as it does the skill of the fisherman. If fish ever had a great awakening, per se, our tactics would definitely be exposed and there wouldn't be no fishing industry, right? If fish just woke up one day and became smart and they're like, oh no, that's bait, I can't take that, then there'd be no point in fishing, right? Obviously, God didn't make him that way, and it's not probably going to happen. I don't know. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens with that. Either way, if they have a great awakening, our tactics are not going to be there. They're not going to be useful, right? So when we look at Christ coming into the world, it kind of threw a wrench in Satan's plans, right? Because we've had a great awakening, per se, and now we can see into the tactics that Satan uses. We can watch the bait that he throws our way so that we can avoid it if we need to, depending on what it is. We know it's Satan throwing that bait to us, and now we can avoid it because we can see it. Because of the great awakening that came to us because Christ came into the world. And he warned us, like the crazy Blaze, that don't do it. It's not good. It's not going to be good if you do this. So whether or not you see it, all around you is a constant spiritual battle raging for your life and for your family. When the human heart is reborn by the Spirit of God, suddenly the devil becomes exposed. And if you choose to believe and practice the Word of God, suddenly we can see, understand, and even resist him. When we resist Satan, what happens? He flees, right? So now we have the Great Awakening because Christ warned us of what's going to happen. So now that we have that Great Awakening, we can resist the things that Satan brings our way, and he's going to have no choice but to flee. Isn't that what the Bible tells us? We resist him, he's going to flee from us. So now we know, or we can see, what the enemy is trying to do and what he's trying to use in order to take us down. The spiritual battle is more real and more significant than any part of your spiritual existence. And yet so often we focus on only on physical, temporary priorities in our lives and families. So I've already mentioned it, but where does this battle take place? I've already mentioned it, so you should know. Where does this battle that we're talking about take place? Nobody? Okay, I got to start from the beginning. I said it right at the beginning, so here we go. Nobody knows, huh? Okay. Well, we're going to expose the enemy here, and I will start in 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations, and every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. So where does this battle take place? Imaginations. Perfect. Like you've been listening the whole time. The battlefield is our imagination, right? Our imagination plays tricks on us, doesn't it? Our imagination, if we're not careful, runs wild. And it can cause a lot of chaos. It can cause a lot of heartache. It can cause a lot of stuff because that's where the battlefield is. That's where Satan is playing, right? Satan is in our imaginations trying to bait us, trying to lure us in to take us down. In verse 3, what I just read, Paul draws our attention to the existence of this spiritual battle. In verse 4, he explains that our weapons must be spiritual. In other words, the attack will be against your spirit. And in verse 5, he exposes the battlefield, quote unquote, and uses the word imagination. You must understand that the battlefield of the spiritual war in your life is your imagination. Our attack, our attitude, the spiritual condition of our heart is always the first thing that's going to change in a spiritual attack. So because we are gearing this towards teenagers, I think everybody has gone through the teenage years, unless you're younger than a teenager, right? You didn't just appear one day. So you know the teenage years. You know that the teenage years can be hard. You know they can be tough, right? If you have teenagers, obviously you know teenage years can be tough. If you have kids that are getting close to the teenage years, you still know that they can be tough because they're still kids and they're still getting to that point. So our attitude, okay, let me start with this. For those who have had kids or have kids, do they have attitude issues? I think it's safe to say that every kid in this world has some kind of an attitude issue, right? So when we look at our attitude and the spiritual condition of our heart, when we're under a spiritual attack, that's going to be the first thing to change, right? That's going to be the first thing that people are going to notice is our attitude. It's going to be the thing that when a teenager is acting out, something is going on, right? They don't just act out because they act out. There's a battle raging that they're trying to fight, right? So when our attitude is affected, that means we're in a spiritual attack. If the devil can twist your spirit towards a key relationship in your life or towards God himself, then everything else is going to follow. Parents that have kids, has there been a time when you have felt that your kids just don't love you anymore and they will not ever be good? Has there been a time in your life when you've had that? There is, right? Because the devil is twisting spirits, right? the devil is in that battlefield and doing this spiritual attack on a teenager that doesn't really know what to do. So when we look at the, well, I'm fixing to come to it. I'm going to back up a little bit. If the devil can twist the spirit towards a key relationship in your life or towards God, then he himself or God, then everything else is going to follow, because the battle is won or lost in your spirit. If Satan can get to our spirit and change our attitudes towards key relationships in our lives, then he's already won that battle, right? He's already had success. He's already been a successful fisherman because he has now turned your attitude against a key relationship in your life, whether it be a pastor, parent, whatever, family member, whatever key relationship it is in your life. So what does this mean practically and functionally? When we look at the imagination, we should think about it as a given thought rather than a function of the brain, because there's two perspectives and two perceptions in any given circumstance of life. The first one is truth, or the knowledge of God, or what God knows to be true. The second is what the devil would have you imagine in a given situation to mislead your spirit, your attitude, and eventually your actions. These imaginations must be cast down because they are from our enemy who wants to destroy us. So two perspectives, two perceptions on any circumstance of life in life. The first one's easy. It's good, it's right, it's what God knows to be true, right? The second one, another easy one, it's false, it's what the devil wants you to believe. Trying to twist that imagination or mislead your spirit. So the passage that we just read gives a clear indication that Satan and his messengers use the battleground of our imagination to work against the truth, the knowledge of God in our lives. One thing that would make this spiritual battle easy is if the devil would just come up and introduce himself, right? Like, hey, I'm Satan, fixing to mess with your life. But that doesn't happen, right? Because Satan is what? Subtle. He's very deceptive. He doesn't make himself known, because if he made himself known, he wouldn't be a great fisherman. So that's obviously not how it works, because he's more invisible. He's one that wants to stay in the background, subtle, invisible, so you don't know he's there. He comes to us in first person, planting crazy imaginations in our hearts and in our hearts that will grow and sometimes grow crazily, like a wildfire that's on a dry desert, right? I mean, that's pretty fast. That's a really fast way to grow. I don't know how else to describe how fast it could be. But you know how fast wildfires grow. They grow really fast. So Satan, when he comes in and plants crazy imaginations in our hearts, it's going to grow crazily fast. It's not going to be something that is just a slow, steady pace, because he wants to destroy you as fast as he can, right? He wants to come into your imagination and make sure that you understand that he's in control, because now he's deceiving you and he's the one that's making you think whatever it is. So our enemy's desire is that we would imagine a false reality, create a false truth, and then begin acting in response to it. Satan flares up in our lives against what's true and against what God knows to be true. So have you ever unintentionally offended somebody? I think, again, that's probably safe to say most of us in this room have unintentionally offended somebody, right? Usually something was said or done or taken out of context, or both of those happened and then it was taken out of context. So when this happens, what's going on? How can we unintentionally offend somebody in our lives? Before I go through my answers, can somebody just tell me? Anybody have a guess? How can we unintentionally offend somebody? What's that? Okay. I mean, yeah, definitely. You can definitely talk before you think, for sure. But when we unintentionally do it, though, what are we doing? We're not even talking to this person at this point, right? We may say something and they hear it, whatever. But when we unintentionally do it, Satan is planting an imagination into their heart, right? Because remember, the battlefield is the imagination. So when something happens unintentionally, Satan is now planting that imagination in this person's heart, and it just starts to grow like wildfire, right? Because now they think everything you said about them was true, or whatever this person said was true, however it works, the unintentional part. There's so many variances to it. But either way, Satan plants that imagination into the heart, and that imagination exalts itself until the truth was strangled away, right? So now there's no more truth because that imagination has been won. Kids, have you ever had the thought that you could never please your parents? I'm looking at these three specifically. No, you never had that thought, Eli? That you could never please your parent, your mom? You've never had that thought. Well, never once. All right. He doesn't try? Oh, well, I mean, that would explain it. If he doesn't try, then he can't have the thought. Either way, so when everybody else has gone through those teenage years, have you had that thought? And you might even still, if your parents are still alive, have you had that thought, I just cannot please my parent, my mom, my dad, whatever the case? It's something that everybody experiences. It's something that everybody has. But why is this? Why do we have that thought or that imagination? It's planted in a moment, but then it begins to exalt itself. It begins to grow until we become angry, until we become bitter, until we act out in some kind of harshness because of that imagination. Now, every time you have that thought, you're not going to be bitter about your parents, right? That's not what I'm saying. But those are the steps that happen. When we have that thought saying we can never please our parents, then our imaginations start to grow until these things happen. Angerness, bitterness, and then we act out in some kind of harsh way. In this situation, parents, look at your parents, but then look at you as a parent and the situations you've been through. Now you're like, what in the world has gotten into you, right? People with kids know, and even younger kids, what's going on? What's happening here? Parents are caught off guard. Parents don't know. But here's the thing, the kids have let an imagination be planted that they can't control. So why can't they control it? Maybe they haven't learned how to control it yet, right? We know that Christ came into the world so that we can see the things that Satan gives us, but maybe as a child, maybe as a teenager, they just aren't mature enough as a Christian yet to see these things. Not all of them, right? Not all kids, not all teenagers, but it's a common struggle that everybody has. One, we're human. Remember, we're the dumb fish. Everybody has these struggles, right? Doesn't matter how spiritual we are. In most circumstances, we're going to have imagination struggles, right? So every parent has had this thought: my kid doesn't need me as much as they did before. Has any parents thought that? My kid just doesn't need me as much as they did before. So here's what we do with that. With that thought, both begin to less and less time together, all because of an imagination that was planted and then accepted. When parents have that mindset, then they tend to just leave their teenagers alone because that's what they think their teenagers want, right? So now they've just pushed them to the side in a sense, right? They spend less and less time with their teenagers. They spend less and less time with kids. And now their bond has now grown farther and farther apart. But it's only because there was an imagination that was planted and then accepted. But here's the truth. While young people may never say it or show it, young people need parents more now than ever, especially in the preteen to a young adult age, right? They need their parents more than ever. They need someone there that they can talk to, that they can rely on. They need someone there that they can say, hey, I had a bad day. What do I do? What do I do in this circumstance? They're not always going to have the pastor to come to. They're not always going to have me as a youth pastor to come to because you're at home with them. You're the one that's there. You're the one that they can rely on, that they should rely on, that they should be able to rely on. So they need you now more than ever in their lives. Every husband and wife has had some kind of imagination at one point. I cannot please my spouse, whatever the imagination was. But even the strongest of marriages have had that imagination. I just can't please them. There's nothing I can do to please them, right? So what's the source of all these imaginations, and where do these thoughts come from? Anybody have a guess? Satan, the devil. I heard Satan, but I was waiting for him because she was touching him like, say it. So our enemy, Satan, is the one that plants these thoughts in our minds. Young or old or middle-aged or whatever you want to go by, no matter how old you are, we all have an enemy that's out to destroy us. We all have a very prepared enemy that's out to destroy us, that wants to lure us in with his baits and then get into our imagination so that we can have these thoughts and more, right? So he's trying to convince you that these things are actually true. Once that thought is accepted, we tend to run with it, and imagination begins to exalt itself against the truth. It is amazing when we can imagine that someone is talking about us, right? Who's had this circumstance or this situation? I'm just going to use here for an example because we're here. So Pastor and I are talking up front here, okay? And you're off in the back doing your own thing, but you look at us and you just catch us looking at you. What's your immediate thought? Oh, they're talking about me, right? We're probably not even talking one thing about you, but you had that thought because that imagination has now been planted, right? So now you have a choice. You can let it grow and become bitter about us because we're talking about you, because we've unintentionally offended you, or you can realize that we're really not even talking about you because there's no reason to be talking about you at that point, right? So, not even just this church illustration. Who has had that experience at school or at work or wherever? It happens because those things get into our imagination, right? Oh man, they're talking about me. Oh, the boss. Oh man, boss and my manager, they're talking. I know it's about me, right? At school, the same thing happens when you're homeschool. I don't know if they do that at the homeschool, but they probably are. Yeah, that's probably true. But when you're anywhere you're at, you have that thought, right? You can be at the airport and people are talking like, oh man, what did I do wrong? Right? It just happens. Imaginations come into our mind because Satan is planting them there. If we let them grow, then we can become bitter towards that person. And there's no reason to be, right? So we have to be careful when those kind of thoughts come into our mind, because not everybody has an impure motive and not everybody is talking about us, right? So we can imagine that someone is thinking something, or that someone meant something, or that someone has an impure motive or intention, and then we give imagination complete credence as if it was a fact. This is what these false imaginations do. They lift themselves up against God's truth, and all the while the enemy is on the sidelines laughing because he's hooked you, right? He's thrown the bait, he's lured you in, and now you're hooked. He's done exactly what he set out to do from the very beginning of whatever it was that circumstance was. By this point, I hope that you can see how critical the battlefield of our imaginations are, and how subtle that the enemy can mislead you. Ultimately, these false imaginations lead to wrong actions and broken relationships, right? The enemy is subtle and he's crafty. As we know him, he's the father of all lies, right? And he never tells the truth. As you become aware of his tactics, you can begin to stop them sooner. Before we accept a lie, we can give God the chance to expose it. As you begin to recognize and respond to your thought life, your heart life, you will take on a completely different perspective. When it would be impossible, or it is impossible for me to apply every single bait that Satan uses to everybody's life, right? Because as we pointed out at the beginning, everybody is different. I don't know what your bait looks like. I don't know what your bait looks like, and your bait and your bait. I don't know. I know what my bait looks like, but I don't know what your bait looks like. But here's what we can do as a collective or as a whole. We know that Satan uses different kinds of bait. We know what the bait is that trips us up, so now we can look for it. We know that when imaginations go wild, it's probably not of Christ, right? When something is planted and it's nothing to do with truth, we just kind of have these thoughts or thinking about different things, or everybody's against me. It's not of God, so we know that, right? We've identified that as an issue. So when these false imaginations come, now we have a choice. We can either identify them as such, or we can let them continue to grow and fester, right? So we have a choice. Just like anything in life, we have a choice. So even though I can't say or point out every detail and circumstance in your life with these things, God can shed that light on what they are if you will ask him and if you'll give him the moment to do so. One thing that we can do is start by looking at the most significant relationships in our lives. These are the ones that the devil is most interested in destroying. For kids and teens, he's very, very interested in destroying the relationship between the kid and the parent, right? And for adults, I think it would still be the same thing. He's interested in destroying that relationship because that's a two-way street, if you want to say. But also any kind of family, right? Who all don't raise your hand, but who has family struggles? There's a family member in your family that you just have issues with, right? Whether it be your fault, whether it be their fault, doesn't matter. There are issues, right? Family, it just happens. But here's the thing with family. When we look at our family, when we look at our parents, those are key relationships, right? Whether we agree everything about our family or not, it still can be a key relationship in our life, especially if it's someone that's very close and that does help us along in our life, right? So Satan is going to look to destroy relationships between family, between parents, between pastors, and between godly friendships. Imagination is the battleground, but key relationships are the target. If you have a relationship that is struggling, here's something that I think a lot of people have to swallow their pride on, right? If there's a key relationship that's struggling, go to that person and ask if the things that you're imagining is true. I'd probably say 8 out of 10 is probably not the case, right? Especially in the teenage years. Maybe in the adult years, it might be a little bit different on the numbers because we're a little bit more wise on circumstances, right? Wise. We're more wise. So, but if we do have a relationship that is struggling, one of the best ways to find out if it's a true struggle or if it's just an imagination ran wild is to talk to him about it, right? Now, is that super easy to do? No, it's hard, right? But who said life was going to be easy? Life isn't easy. Life is full of hard things, right? So one of the best things that we can do to make sure it's not an imagination that's gone crazy is to go and ask them. Because you may have been allowing your imagination to deceive you in that relationship. Once you have cast down imaginations, your relationships will be strengthened. Satan is fishing for you and in some cases may be winning. Your imagination is the battleground. Key relationships are the target. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. How are you making sure that Satan doesn't lure you in today? What are you doing to guard your imagination today? There are things that we can do to guard them. And for the teens, we'll go into this next week. But what are you doing today to guard your imagination so that Satan can't come in and ruin your relationships and ultimately ruin your life with those false imaginations? Let's pray. Father, we do thank you for today. We do thank you for the opportunity to be able to take a look at your word, Lord, that we can read it, that we can learn from it, so that we can see the things that we need to do to live a better life. But Lord, also that we can see the things that Satan uses and the tactics that he uses to try to get into our heads and try to get into our lives and break up families. Lord, I just pray that you would help us to look at our own hearts, our own imaginations, and see if we've let Satan come in any capacity. Lord, that you would help us to resist him so that he would flee from us. Father, I just pray that you would help us as young people, as families, as the older generation. Lord, no matter what age we are, no matter what stage of life we're in, Father, I pray that you would help us to look at the things that we've allowed into our hearts and make sure that there's no imaginations running wild, especially with the key relationships that we have. Father, I pray that you'd bless now the time we have. I pray that if there's anything that anybody wants to just talk to you about, that they would either kneel at their seats, come down, and just talk to you, Lord. If they want to talk to somebody, that they do that as well. But either way, Father, I just pray that you would